the title for today is Improved Productivity with AutoCAD Dynamic Blocks. I have a pre-title as well, which is Building Blocks Are Not Just for Kids. Before I begin, I'll just go over the objectives of this class and see what all we will be able to accomplish by the end of this class. And so you will notice the bold words in each objective on the screen, and these are the action items for this class today. So the first objective is to add parameters to converted geometry. And the converted geometry here means the geometry that has been converted into a standard block. Then the second objective is to associate some actions to the added parameter. Now, both of these things together make the blocks dynamic. So parameters and actions together convert a standard block into dynamic block. And the third objective is to use the cloud environment to store and retrieve the blocks. And although it is not about dynamic blocks per se, but it is about how to access your blocks, which can be dynamic or otherwise, using the cloud environment. This means reliable access of blocks anywhere and from any internet connected device, which can be a tablet or a mobile device. Now, first, I will explain each objective using the PowerPoint slides, as you can see on the screen, and then I will subsequently demonstrate the objective using the AutoCAD software. So after a few slides, you will see the demonstration after that in the AutoCAD software. So, so before we dive deep into each objective, let's first try to understand what dynamic blocks are and how are they different from regular blocks. So to explain that, I'll share a small story with you. A long time ago, all stories start like that. Anyways, I was working for a company that would make assets for different other companies that were our clients. By assets, what I meant is that we would create AutoCAD drawings of their objects. One such client we had was a playground company, and that's where the name of the title, that pre-title for this class came from. Building Blocks Is Not Just for Kids. So we had to make drawings of various playground equipment. And what we realized was that each equipment, for example, there was a slide, and the same slide came in 4 different sizes. So instead of making 4 separate blocks of 4 different sizes of slides, we started by creating a single block of the slide. And then we would incorporate all the 4 sizes within that same block. That's what a dynamic block is, and that's where the difference between a standard block and a dynamic block lies. A standard block is a single instance of a block, whereas in a dynamic block, we define one instance of the block, but different actions and parameters are added such that you can have the same block in different sizes or different orientations, like you could have a flipping action defined in them. You could also incorporate different visibility states and many other different configurations as well. Therefore, these dynamic blocks, in a way, they become intelligent objects which can change as per the parameters and actions that are defined for them. What it does is that it reduces rework because we are not building 4 different objects from scratch, which in turn helps in increased productivity as well. Now, how do we add variations to a standard block? That is done by adding actions and parameters, or in other words, the parameters and actions convert a standard block into a dynamic one. So the next logical question is, where and how do we add those parameters and actions? And that is where the block editor comes into picture, as we add the parameters and actions to a standard block in the block editor. Now, I will explain the block editor and the tools available therein in the next few slides, but first let's see how to get to the block editor. Although I think most of you who have already a basic knowledge of AutoCAD, they know how to get to the block editor, but I will still quickly show you different methods. One is through the block definition dialog box, which you can see on the right of the screen. And again, most of you know that we use the block definition dialog box to create a standard block. Now, in this dialog box, in addition to different block creation options, you have the Open in Block Editor checkbox that you can see in the slide. The arrow is pointing towards it, right? So, so checking this option opens the newly created block directly in the block editor. Now, if you have a standard block already created, now in that case, you have to get to the edit block definition dialog box. So if you have an already created block, double click it and it opens the edit block definition dialog box. Select the block there and say OK to open that block in the block editor. This edit block definition dialog box can also be opened using the block editor tool in the insert tab of the ribbon. We have opened the block in the block editor environment. From the block editor block definition dialog box or from the edit block definition, wherever, but this is where once we open the block in the block editor environment, you will notice that the block is displayed on a grayish background, which is the default color of the block editor environment. This also gives you an indication that you're working in a different environment than the drawing window. And it also opens the block editor contextual tab in the ribbon, which has all the tools that are used for creation of dynamic blocks. Along with the contextual tab, the block authoring palettes are also opened. I'll talk about the block palettes in a second, but let's get back to the contextual tab, which contains all the actions and parameters that are required for creation of the dynamic block. And additionally, you also have the tools for testing the dynamic block and saving it. Now, as I mentioned earlier, along with the contextual tab, the block authoring palettes are displayed. You can see that on the screen. There's an arrow pointing towards it. This contains actions and parameters that are logically bunched together in their respective tabs. So the authoring tools are located in both the contextual tab and the block authoring palettes. They're the same, but personally, I find the palettes easier to use. It is just personal preference, or if you want to use the authoring tools from the contextual tab, or you want to use it from the palettes, block authoring palettes. Let's see the authoring tools available. I'll give you an overview of the block authoring tools, and then we will subsequently go deeper into the parameters and the actions that are the first two objectives of today's class. As you can see on the screen, there are 4 tabs in the block authoring palette. They are parameters, actions, parameter sets, and constraints. So parameters are aspects of geometry that are controlled by actions. And actions are what needs to be done with the geometry. Then parameter sets, these lets you define, they have the parameters and actions together in a single tool. And it basically, these parameter sets, they provide you some standard parameter and action combinations. And finally, constraints are meant to retain correct shape and correct geometry. So today I will be demonstrating some of the parameter tools and some of the action tools to create a dynamic block. You know, dynamic blocks is really vast and you can do some awesome stuff with it. I know that many of you must have had extensive experience with dynamic blocks, but those of you who have not used dynamic blocks as much, I'm hoping that this class will be a starting point and will urge you to dive deep into it. and use it in your everyday work. So before I go further with the creation of dynamic blocks, let me first demonstrate how to get to the block editor. Although this is not an objective, but it is a necessary step in the creation of a dynamic block. So now you can see the AutoCAD 2024 on the screen. And here you see the geometry of a desk and a chair unit, and it's open in the drawing window. We will start by creating a block of this desk unit. And in the block definition dialog box, we open that. We enter the name and then pick its base point and select the objects, which includes both the desk and the chair together. I think most of you know how to create a regular standard block. And now just note that the open in block editor, I have checked that, which will open the standard block, this standard block in the block editor environment. You can see that there's a gray background, which indicates that it's a different environment than the drawing window. And you can see the block authoring palettes are displayed, which have the different tabs, which is the parameter, tabs, actions tab, then the parameter sets and constraints. All the relevant tools are available in their respective tabs. And the block editor contextual tab is also opened. You can see there. And it has the tools, as I mentioned, to save and test the block. And sometimes what happens, your block authoring palette is not displayed. In that case, you can select the palette button to display it here. It's controlled by that. And as I mentioned also, that all the parameter and action tools are also available here as well. You can see that all the parameter tools and the action tools are there. Again, it is personal preference whether you use it from the palette or you use it from the tabs, from the drop-down menus in the block editor contextual tab. So this is all about block editor. We have reached there. Now let's discuss the parameters and actions, which are the first two objectives of today's class. Both of these need to be discussed together. So let's start with parameters. So parameters are generally, they're the first item to be added to create dynamic blocks. And they define the aspects of geometry that are needed to be controlled by action. In other words, we need to define the geometry that we want to manipulate and how we want to manipulate it. On most parameters, you need to apply actions for them to work. I'm saying most parameters, not all. There are some exceptions here, but most of them need, most of the parameters need actions. So for example, linear, polar, rotation, these are the regular kind of parameters, and these work in a two-step process. First, you apply the parameter, and then you apply the associated action with it. For example, if you want the block to be able to hold different sizes, that's what I was talking about earlier, then we use the linear parameter and then associate a stretch or scale action with it. Now, having said that, again, I'm repeating this, that certain parameters are completely independent and don't need actions to be associated. The examples of that one are the alignment or the visibility parameter. They don't need actions to be applied to them. They work independent. They are complete in themselves. Now, when you apply a parameter, what all do you need to do? So obviously you need to first define the geometry and certain other specifications as well. So again, I'm saying it's different for different parameters. For example, for a linear parameter, you need to specify the start and the end point for the distance. But in case of a rotation parameter, you need to specify the base point, radius, and then the angle. As with regular AutoCAD commands, you get the prompts here as well. So these prompts are pretty straightforward, and you just have to follow those prompts to specify what the parameter needs. So when the parameter is placed, a specific grip points are also displayed with it. As you can see on the screen, for the linear parameter, there are two grips which are pointing one to those blue arrows. You can see one is pointing to the right and the other one is pointing to the left. These are the grip points for the parameter. And then for the rotation parameter, you can see a blue circle, that cyan circle there. That is the grip point for the rotation parameter. Now, after the parameter has been set, actions, as I said before, action needs to be added for it to work properly. Now, again, most cases, both parameter and actions work in partnership. Let's define the action. The word, this is the dictionary meaning of the word action. It means that the process of doing something to achieve a certain goal. And that is exactly what it does in dynamic blocks as well. It defines what you're going to do to the associated geometry. As I said before, without an action, the parameter is incomplete. Not all, but most of them. So an action is required to be associated with a parameter. And how do we associate an action with the parameter? What all is required for adding that action? So when associating an action, you first need to select the parameter. Obviously, you are choosing to which parameter you are applying that action to. For example, which you want to associate the action to. As with parameters, the next steps are action specific. For example, for a stretch action, after selecting the parameter, which in this case is the linear parameter, then you are required to specify the point of action. It can be either the right or the left points. After which you're prompted to define the area, which is called the frame. And finally, you specify the objects. Now, in the lower image on the left side, you can see the area which is called the frame. And you can see the green crossing window defining the objects. And once you complete the process of associating an action, the icon for action is displayed along with the parameter grip. You can see that action icon has been associated with that right parameter grip point. On the screen, you can see that. Now, let's demonstrate the parameters and actions as we apply them in the block editor. So what we want to do is we want to stretch the desk horizontally. So in the block authoring palette, in the parameters tab, select the linear parameter. It prompts for 2 points for the distance, and then it displays the parameter. You click a point to place it. Now it is displaying the parameter. It displays the 2 linear grips and also an exclamation mark. This exclamation mark, it indicates that no action is associated with the parameter. Now in the actions tab, select the stretch action. We'll select the stretch action. And following the prompts, first we select the parameter that I want to associate the action with, which is the linear parameter. Then select the point of action, which is the right. I'm selecting the right grip point. And then the frame of action, which is the right side. I'm selecting the right side because I want it to stretch on the right side only. And finally, the geometry for the action to work on. Now here I'm selecting the geometry because we want to stretch on the right side. So we still have to select the 2 horizontal edges and the right vertical edge, which can be done by a crossing window. So you will notice that the action icon that is associated with the right grip point. Now note that the left grip point has still an exclamation mark, which indicates that no action is associated with that grip point. But for our case today, I don't want to stretch it on the left side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that grip point, the left-hand side grip point, and delete it, because I only want to select the stretch the desk on the right-hand side. Now let's apply another parameter, but this time it's an independent parameter. So we select the alignment parameter and apply the left point as the base point, and then select the horizontal edge of the desk as the edge that will align with any other surface. You know, once we take it into the drawing window, it should align there. Now we have the alignment grip at the left corner, the linear grip at the right point pointing towards the right, and the stretch action associated with it. Let's talk about the properties palette. Although it's not one of the objectives, but it is associated with the parameters and can be extremely useful. There can be multiple dynamic blocks in a drawing, and it can get really complicated. So it's a good practice to label your parameters by assigning a name and a description to them. And this is where the properties palette, it comes in handy. As the various properties of any regular object are listed in the properties palette, it is very similar for the parameters as well. When you select a parameter, all its properties are listed in the properties palette, and you can manipulate the properties here. So for example, on the slide, you can see the properties of the linear parameter. In the properties labels and labels, the distance one is the name given by default, and you can change it to something else that is more appropriate and also gives a description. This will help you later on in identifying about the parameter. There are additional properties as well, and these properties are parameter dependent, which means that they differ for each parameter. Now, in case of the linear parameter, you can set the value set options, and these allow you to set certain restrictions for manipulation. You can select the distance type, or where you can include a built-in length sizes, either in increments or in the form of a list. For a minute, let's go back to the block editor and talk about some of the tools therein. This is the block editor contextual tab, I mean to say. There is a test block tool, which, as you must have gathered, is used to test the block. It opens the dynamic block in a separate test window. Whatever changes you make here, they do not affect the actual dynamic block. It's simply the testing environment. Once you're done testing, close the test window and you're back in the block editor. Once the dynamic block is working properly, you can then use the save tool to save the block. You do not want to lose all the work, and then finally you can use the close block editor tool in the contextual tab to revert it back to the regular dynamic drawing environment. Now that we have a dynamic block created, how would you be able to tell how you can manipulate it and what all is built into it? So to know what kind of variation is built into a dynamic block, we need to first select it, which displays the grips on it. Each shape of the grip indicates the action or variation that has been incorporated into that block. Now, the available block grips are lengthen, shorten grip. These are the arrow grips, arrow looking grips. Then there's the list grip, which is also an arrow, but it has a bar at the top, and align grip, which then the flip grip is there, and the insert move grip is there, which is a square one. The flip grip, it also looks like a arrow, but it has a little bit of the arrow leader along with it, attached with it. Then the align looks like a polygon shape, and then the rotate grip, which is like a round dot. So all of the So all of these actions are rarely available in a single block, but blocks usually have more than one action in there to work optimally. So these are the sum of the basic grips that you can, once you see in a dynamic block, you know what all can be performed using those grips. So let's demonstrate to add some restrictions to the dynamic block using the properties palette. So let's start by testing the block first. Note that we are in a separate test window. Now select the block and use the right stretch arrow to stretch the desk. So notice that you can stretch it as far as you want, or you can shorten it to any length you want. Although this is the correct result, it should not stretch infinitely. We need to fix this. Now for that, what we'll do is, after we tested and found that we need to fix it, we close the test window and we're back in the block editor. Now stretching the desk infinitely obviously does not make any sense, and therefore we need to put in some more restrictions to it. This can be controlled in the properties palette. Now, first, you can see there's the properties label rollout also. Here, you can add the distance name and give it a distinct name and also the description. But we will add the restrictions in the value set rollout. We'll select the distance type where you can control the stretch either in increments or in the form of a list. We will stretch the desk in increments of 1 feet. That's 1. I have entered there, and note that the increment starts from the left horizontal edge of the desk and continues infinitely again. Or after every 1 feet, there is an increment mark there on the screen. You can see that. So, but this doesn't make sense. Again, we don't want it to go on infinitely. So we give a minimum and maximum restriction. The smallest desk, let's assume, cannot be less than 6 feet, which is defined in the dist minimum, and then we don't want it to go beyond 12 feet. So once we have set, you can see that there are only the variations, 5 or 6 variations that have been put in. Now let's go and first test the block. Use this. You can see there are only 5 or 6 restrictions that you can change the desk size to. So starting from 6 feet 6 inches to 11 feet 6 inches, this is good enough. And now we can save the block because we tested the block. This is what we wanted the block to work as. And then finally, we will close the block editor to get back into the drawing window. Now that we have created the dynamic block and then saved it as well, so we can insert it in the drawing and then use its variations wherever required. Now, this can be done in using the blocks palette. As you all must be knowing how to use the blocks palette, when you open it, you will see this newly created dynamic block in the current drawing tab and also in the recent tab. Also note here that there's a there's a lightning bolt symbol that displays with the block. What it does is it indicates to you that this block is a dynamic block because of that lightning bolt. It indicates that. The blocks palette, let's talk a little because the blocks palette is used for the accessibility over the cloud. So let's talk about the blocks palette a little bit, how you can make the blocks accessible over the cloud. So it allows you to store all the blocks that are located in the recent and the favorites tab into a cloud location, but it cannot be any cloud location. It has to be supported cloud storage provided. As of now, Autodesk, the supported cloud storage providers for Autodesk are Box, Dropbox, Google Drive, and OneDrive. Only these four of those are those supported cloud storage providers. So by storing the blocks on the cloud, what you can do is you can access and use them with any internet-enabled device and from any time, from anywhere. So all you need to do is you're required to be signed into your Autodesk account to allow the application to access your blocks. So once you're on the site or on the field, you can always access your blocks from there using your mobile device or your what do you call it, tablet or a mobile device or any other device which has an internet connection. So how do we create, how do we place those blocks on the block storage providers? So here in the, there's this settings icon in the options area of the blocks palette. Clicking on it, what it does is it opens the block sync settings dialog box. And here in this dialog box, you can select the location on the cloud. And you can also manage your sync settings here. Once you have saved the blocks on the cloud, the setting icon, it is replaced by a cloud icon. You can see that on the screen. I'm pointing the arrows in both the times. So in the options, it shows, first of all, shows the settings icon. But once you have the capability that the block can be accessed over the cloud, the path in the recent and favorite block libraries in the block sync settings has been changed to one of the supported cloud storage providers. It changes itself. The settings icon changes to the cloud icon. So now let's demonstrate the blocks, how we can access it on the cloud. So the dynamic block is saved. We saved it in the previous one, and you will be able to find it in the blocks palette. Note that the new dynamic block is listed in the current drawing tab and also in the recent tab. Note that the block has a lightning bolt symbol, which I said indicates that the block is dynamic. Now let's insert the block to the upper left corner of the room and move the block closer to the slanting wall. And notice how the block automatically snaps into place with its horizontal edge, which flush with the wall. This is because of the alignment parameter that we incorporated in there. Now select the desk unit and it displays its grip. So it has the alignment grip. We saw how it aligned, and it also has the stretch arrow grip. Now select the stretch grip and check the size variations. It has all those 5 or 6 sizes that are available. And let's go to the increase its size to the maximum limit of 11 feet to 6 inches, which is less than 12 feet. Let's now go to the options area and in the blocks palette, and note there is this settings icon, correct? This indicates that the blocks are not accessible on the cloud and they cannot be accessed on other devices. To change this, click on the settings icon to open the block sync settings dialog box. And here you will set the path to the location to a supported cloud storage provider. For our case, I'll choose the Dropbox. I have access to Dropbox, which is one of the Autodesk supported cloud storage providers. And in the block sync setting dialog box, note the new path to the Dropbox. And here you can set the permissions as well and then say OK. Once you said OK, notice that the setting icon is changed into a cloud icon, which indicates that the block in the recent tab and the favorites tab of the blocks palette are now available on the cloud and can be accessed on multiple internet-enabled devices from any location. So finally, let's recap how to create dynamic blocks and how to store and retrieve them using the cloud environment. The first objective was to apply the parameters to the converted geometry, which here means is a standard block. Use the block editor to apply the parameters and specify the geometry to manipulate. Remember that parameters alone cannot create a dynamic block. You need to associate an action with it. Although this is not the case for all the parameters, but in most cases, an action needs to be associated with the parameter for it to work. That brings us to the second objective for today. So for the action, the first and foremost step is to identify the parameter to associate it with. Then you have to define the frame and then the geometry and finally the point of action. Although this completed the creation of the dynamic block, but as you saw, most of the times we need to put some more restrictions and add some control to the dynamic block for it to work optimally. Therefore, for the parameter and action to work optimally, we saw how important the properties palette was. Not only do we use the properties palette to put restrictions, but we also use it to label the parameter, which is important for bigger blocks that can have multiple parameters and multiple actions in there. And finally, the third objective was about using the cloud environment and how to make use of the cloud storage providers to store and retrieve the blocks on multiple devices anytime and from anywhere. This feature is useful for those of you who might be going on the site and want to have the blocks available to you anywhere. So as we saw, this can be done through the blocks palette, where the settings icon, it changes to the cloud icon, indicating the accessibility of blocks over the cloud. Using the cloud storage provider's specific cloud collaboration features, each cloud storage provider has their own specific collaboration features. You can also share those blocks with your team members such that there is no duplication of work, right? And so it's a great tool to use, accessibility over the cloud, as it makes the block available on the field, and you can also share it with your team members, with your peers, and everybody else. So you don't have to work more, but you have your productivity will be improved immensely by using the dynamic blocks, that too over using the cloud access.